Hey everyone, welcome back to my channel. In today's video, we're diving into a topic that affects millions of students and graduates: how student loan interest is actually calculated. If you've ever been confused about why your student loan balance continues to grow, even when you're not borrowing more, or if you're thinking about taking a student loan, this video is for you. We'll break down the basics, explain the interest rate calculation, and show you just how interest accumulates over time. So let's get into it. Student loan interest can be very complicated. I personally was 100% clueless when I took out my student loans. I received no guidance from the financial aid department of my school, and even worse, I didn't ask any questions. I just kept taking out student loans without thinking about it, and eventually my student loan ballooned to about $134,000. I really thought nothing of interest, which was not smart, even though there's this sneaky little algorithm in there that will rack up your debt little by little if your loan is in deferment or forbearance, and even if you're on an income-based repayment plan. Let's start with the basics. What is interest? Interest is extra money paid at a specific cadence and at a specific rate. Fortunately or unfortunately, this extra money is the price or consequence of taking out a loan or delaying repayment. Interest rates on federal student loans are fixed, and they are actually determined by federal law, not by the U.S. Department of Education. These federal student loan interest rates do change annually, but the actual interest rate is fixed for a specific loan. It will never change month to month or year to year. So if you take out a student loan with a student loan interest of 6%, that 6% will be the interest rate for the entirety of that loan period. Next, let's get into how interest is actually accrued. Interest is applied or starts the moment a student loan is dispersed. And under normal circumstances, the student loan interest will not stop growing until you fully pay off your student loan. Unlike some other types of loans or credit, direct loans from the federal student aid program actually accumulate interest daily. For federal loans, the math may seem a little bit sneaky if you don't take the time to review all of the information that is provided to you when you take out your loan, which sadly I did not, and of course I had no idea what I was actually getting myself into. So the definition of the calculation is: interest is calculated as a percentage of the unpaid principal amount, and the amount of interest that accrues month to month is based actually on a daily interest formula. This is where it gets tricky. So let me break it down for you. Here's the formula visually. The interest amount on a student loan equals the outstanding principal balance times the interest rate factor times the number of days since the last payment. What is the interest rate factor? When I read this, my brain basically congealed and I had no idea what I was looking at. So if you're like me, the interest rate factor is essentially your daily interest rate. And the calculation for this interest rate factor is a loan's interest rate divided by the number of days in the year. So let's look at an example. How do we calculate the interest rate factor for a student loan that has an interest rate of 6.8%? We're going to take the percentage and then turn it into decimals. So essentially just moving that decimal point over to the left 2 times so that we can do the calculation. So it's simply 0.068 divided by 365, which is of course 365 days in a year. With that calculation, the interest rate factor on a student loan with an interest rate of 6.8% is this long decimal number, aka if we turn it back into a percentage, it's 0.019% as the daily interest rate. So now knowing that the interest rate factor is 0.019%, we'll use that as an example in the actual calculation for your interest. As a reminder, the interest amount calculation is outstanding principal balance times the interest rate factor times the number of days since the last payment. To give you an example with the real numbers, let's say we have a student loan balance of $30,000. The interest rate is 6.8%, And based on our previous calculation, the interest rate factor, or the daily interest rate for that, is 0.019%. That means if we take these numbers and we plug it into the calculation and do the math for $30,000 times the interest rate factor times 30 for 30 days in a month, the total interest amount for that month would be $167.67. Then on top of the interest that accumulates, we also have capitalization, which is the real kicker. Capitalization happens when you do not pay student loan interest in full. And when you do not pay this interest in full, any unpaid interest is then added to your original principal balance. This capitalization generally happens at specific milestones within the loan period. The first milestone typically happens at the end of your grace period, and the second milestone is at the end of either forbearance or deferment. This means that even if your student loan is in deferment or forbearance and you do not have to make a payment, interest will still continue to grow within that deferment or forbearance period. At the end of this period, any unpaid interest will capitalize. Once unpaid interest capitalizes, aka is added to your original principal balance, future interest will be calculated on this new balance. So let's go back and take another look at the example. If my student loan balance is $30,000, my interest rate is 6.8%, and the interest rate factor, or the daily interest rate, is 0.019%, my interest rate for this particular month would be $167.67. If for whatever reason I do not pay this $167.67 of interest, this can capitalize. So that would mean that this interest amount of $167.67 would be added to the original balance of $30,000. And my new principal balance would become $30,167.67. And I would now be accumulating interest on this new principal balance. Very scary stuff, if I do say so myself, and this is how we get ourselves into a lot of trouble by not understanding the student loan interest calculations and capitalization. When you are determining if you should take out a student loan, or when you are preparing to tackle your student loan repayment, it is important to keep in mind that any minimum payment will go towards your outstanding interest first and not to your principal. The challenging part of all of this is that we rarely take enough time to understand the consequences of debt and do not have a solid plan to repay it. So when we do fall into debt, too often do we get stuck in a loop of just paying the interest, and we end up paying thousands more just to the interest alone. In order to lower the cost of your student loan, it is important to really take a look at those numbers and feel the impact of how much money you could be accumulating. It's very easy to ignore, and I'm 100% guilty of this. And in the end, depending on the size of your loan, you could end up paying your lender, whether it's a bank or the government, thousands of dollars in interest. Does the lender really deserve that? Does the government really deserve that? Wouldn't you want that money for something more important? So again, learn from me, make a plan, make a budget. Start making payments as soon as you can. And if you're able, pay more than the minimum amount to be able to keep your student loan down to the minimum and to pay it off faster. Hopefully now you have a clearer understanding about how student loan interest works. If you found this video helpful, give it a thumbs up, subscribe down below, and I'll see you in my next video. Bye for now.